Good afternoon, everybody. I will go ahead and call our November 6th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting together. To order, I should say. The first thing I'd like to do is welcome Tim Simmons. He's our new person on the block, so welcome, Tim. We're glad to have you. And this is the only time you're going to get a thanks for being on this committee, so enjoy it.
Would you mind saying it again?
Yes, thank you again. The first item on the agenda is the approval for the October 2nd meeting. Commissioners, y'all have had that for about a week. Are there any corrections that need to be made? If not, I'll accept a motion.
I'll move approval.
Do I have a second?
Second.
We'll put Charles down for the second. Emily, any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
One abstention with Tim, and who else was not here last week? Jay, were you here last month? Yes, sir. Were you? Okay. One abstention, and with that said, the motion passes unanimously. First item on the agenda, ZC 1715, public hearing to look at our site plan reviews.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a carryover from the last meeting. We introduced this at the last meeting, had some discussions about it. In your packet, it's on the memo portion. I also included the current language, which is under the heading Current Language contained in Article 2, Section 2C. Then I also included the part we've been talking about in the strike-through underline format. Strike-through is, again, striking through current language, underlining is new language we're proposing, and as you can see, a majority of this is new proposals. Essentially, as we had at the last discussion, any zoning amendment that is an office, retail, or service use as described in Article 3B of the ordinance would require a site plan to accompany that rezoning. Also, the Central Business District, and I needed to add one piece of language, and the number 2, it says Central Business District or any commercial zoning district. That's the current language. We didn't want to change that. That's the current language, so I want to add that in there. And that talks about in 10,000 square feet of gross floor area if it exceeds that, and also if it exceeds 30% impervious area, that would also trigger the site plan review, as well as the current language again in the village district, which also has that same language. We did go back, there was some discussion at the last meeting about architectural plans and so forth. We met as a staff with the Public Works Director, Utility Director, and went over what kind of information do we need for a conceptual approval. And so we have changed some of the language for the architectural drawings to be conceptual in nature. We're not looking for detailed drawings. We're looking for conceptual drawings as far as architecture and so forth, so it doesn't put the heavy burden to have to design the site. What we're trying to do is have an approval process where a site plan is required and some of the conceptual elements of how it looks are required, but the heavy engineering, the heavy design, all the heavy surveying would come after you got approval. And that would be done internally under the detailed site plan review process. If you look in the proposal under detailed site plan, we go into that, that information becomes much more detailed, and that is reviewed in-house again after the city council approves a site plan. That becomes an in-house review, and you'd have engineers on our staff working with engineers from the private sector determining whether they meet the requirements or not. I think that's a much more efficient process. One of our goals has been to refocus our efforts on planning, not just permitting. And so we feel like that by really taking the planning perspectives and highlighting those, we can do that. And the engineering, detailed engineering part will come after the approval has been given. And so that way we can, again, you wouldn't be expending a tremendous amount of money until after you know you had gotten approval for that site plan. Now, with that, we have included in there site plan modifications. If for some reason you can't comply with the site plan, there's a process to amend that. There's a minor process that can be done in-house. There's a major process that would have to go back to the city council again. And also, we are putting some teeth into it by saying you have to abide by that site plan. If you don't, you're not going to get a permit. And so this detailed engineering work would be done prior to moving to the building permit stage. That's kind of it in a nutshell, kind of following up from last month's meeting. I think we have gotten a lot of support from this, it seems. We do have a lot of rezonings that there's been undetermined uses and things of that nature. This would be something that would help have a much more clear understanding and a clear vision about what will be done, how it will look, and so forth.
Wayne, back to last month, and I didn't really pick it up in this report, but in the event a year passes and the permit's not been pulled, and the site plan approval is then null and void, what happens to the zoning?
That's a good question. That's something that, as a matter of fact, something Ken and I talked about this afternoon about this, and what we would propose is that it would have to, we would request that that zoning be revert back to the original zoning.
So they can't do a conditional zoning though, right? City council cannot?
That, I mean, typically, in my, I'll defer to Ken on that as well, but typically, to change a zoning, no matter what you do, it has to go back to the city council to change it.
Okay, so,
So we would,
but it would only make sense if you're gonna make them, if we're gonna make them adhere to this, then they could sit on it for a year and still get their
Right.
zoning and not be,
right. Now, we can, now what we can do, Art, that's a great point. We can, it'd be a very simple modification to this amendment we're proposing to say, when the site plan expires, the rezoning will be reverted back, and staff will start that procedure back to work to change it back. We can add that language if that's something that
Okay.
the planning commission wants to see. And that'll tighten that up, close the circle as far as that goes.
do you want typos? You want to know about typos now, or you want to know about those later?
You can show them to me later.
All right.
All right, let me go ahead and open and close the public hearing, and then we'll see what all questions the commissioners have. This is a public hearing, so I'll go ahead and open the public hearing at this time. Does anybody wish to speak to ZC 1715? And I was just telling Ralph, it's interesting to me that here's one of the, biggest changes we're making in 2 or 3 years, and nobody's here, and the first time we have an issue with it, this place it will be in the other room with 300 people yelling and screaming. In that case, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing at this time and turn the meeting over to the commissioners. Yes, sir.
Wayne, I'd get a chance to talk to you about this just so briefly, but help me connect the dots. What in format are you going to actually be submitting to us as the planning commission to review? And what information will have been reviewed by Public Works, whoever, other departments? And will we be given the results of their review at the time when we review? For example, if we're doing compatibility of structures, and it turns out that there is a drainage problem in there, we should know that that drainage problem is in existence. We can't just look at the elevation and say, this looks all right. How is this going to change, in your mind, where does the public going, if they come to the planning commission now, they hear about everything, good, bad, or indifferent. And even though we're being asked to make judgments on things that are really clearly beyond the scope of most of our professional backgrounds, at least that issue is brought out.
Right.
Now, I'm a little concerned now that this is going to become an internal review, you and the applicant, the Public Works, this operations director and so forth down, and they come to us and say to the planning commission, okay, everything passed, now tell us what you think of the plan. How are we supposed to come back and say, what do we think of the plan, when you people with your technical expertise have already reviewed it and said, as far as you're concerned, this plan should be accepted?
All right, let me make clear that what we're doing here, first of all, let me explain the process. We did this last meeting, and I'll go through it again. The process that you would go through to gain approval. In B of this proposal, the first thing you'll do you have a mandatory pre-application conference with staff, and that staff would include Public Works. It would include myself and staff from the planning department. It would include the building official. It would include the utilities director. It would include the pertinent parties that are involved in development in the city of Fairhope. At that pre-application conference, it's really a meeting to discuss what the proposal is, what concerns that we may have, and convey those concerns to the applicant prior to him beginning any kind of design aspects, any kind of design efforts, prior to him submitting his application to us. The second step in that review after the pre-application conference is a community meeting where you meet with the surrounding property owners to gain some of their concerns. Now, in other places I've been, we've had community meetings. I wasn't a believer in them at first, but as I saw things go on, I saw very minor things that the community had that were easy to address if the developer knew about it. Instead, sometimes the first time you hear about these concerns are at a public hearing with the planning commission, which is a little bit late in the game, especially as an engineer or a developer. You've designed this site intensely, engineered and everything else. It's difficult to make changes at that point. So that's the second thing we're doing, is having community meetings. So as the developer will have staff comments, have community comments prior to him designing the first thing on a site. The third step would be the application process. You go submit your application. As a staff internally, once we get that application, it's a complete application, we will again meet with what we call the Development Review Committee meeting. That's an internal meeting we have with staff. The same people that were involved in the pre-application conference would be again reviewing the proposal based on their scope of work. If it's utilities, it'll be Richard Peterson. If it's public works with drainage and site plan, it'll be Richard Johnson. If it's planning, it'll be the planning staff. If it's building department issue or building construction, it would be Eric Cortinez. And they would be submitting comments to the planner or the project manager planner from our staff who is handling the development. They will accumulate those comments and send it out and to the engineer, developer, and to get comments back from them and make correct changes and so forth. Now, as far as, Dr. Thayer, as far as you're concerned about not knowing the details of that, again, if you read the information we're requesting for the site plan in conjunction with a rezoning, it's pretty detailed. I mean, it's pretty detailed, but it's not down to the nth degree of engineering. I will tell you this, that on our staff, we have Richard Peterson's a professional engineer, many years' experience. Richard Johnson's a professional engineer, civil engineer experience, and public works experience. They know their stuff. I mean, I think they're extremely competent and can review those plans very efficiently and have done so in the past and have proven themselves to be able to do a good job. So I think from the Planning Commission standpoint, the information that you're looking at and that you're reviewing is detailed. I mean, it's pretty comprehensive what you're looking at and what you're making a recommendation on, because you're making a recommendation to City Council. The final decision comes to the City Council. So from that perspective, you're not getting just a sketch plan. You're getting some detailed information, very, very detailed, not to the level of the precise engineering of the carrot size of a holding pond or something. I mean, something like that. But you are getting very detailed information that our staff is looking at and providing you those comments when there's a concern. So if we see a concern, it'll definitely be in your packet and your review.
The main concern, and I acknowledge Mr. Peterson's expertise, Mr. Johnson's expertise. What I would like to know when it comes before us, what compromises have been made as far as engineering has been concerned, so that I know about them when I'm working to approve as a citizen planning commissioner. I should know what issues were discussed and what trade-offs were made in there. Now, it used to be with those LID standards in there that there would be a waiver, and we would be told why it was being waived. Okay, I would hope that see something like that continue.
Let me be very, very clear about compromises. I mean, I'll be extremely clear on this. We don't have the authority as staff to give compromises on the ordinance. The ordinance is what it is. We don't have the ability to give that. We don't. I mean, we have defined standards that we must go by. I can submit to you that if there's compromises, that they're not coming from us, and if there is something that's needed, it would again come through that process with a waiver. We're not trying to change that at all, but we're not in the business of wheeling and dealing behind the scenes. That's not something we want to do. We are rules followers. That's what we go by. Staff, we don't want to be in the business of making trade-off and concessions. That's not our job. Our job is to read these plans based on the ordinance. So I can assure you that from our end of things, there won't be any concessions or anything like that unless the appropriate authorities have given those.
No, well, I'm not accusing you of bad faith or anything like that. I'm just simply saying, as we get further into this, I think things are going to become clearer. But by that time, this will be in a place. with me not knowing exactly how this is going to take shape.
Right.
And so it's like going out and buying a car and says, trust me.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
I-
but, yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
The way I was reading it, it seems to sort of formalize a process that a lot of people already follow, which is it's not at the onset before they've designed something, making sure they're interpreting the zoning correctly and they fully understand what they should be doing, then developing a design, then submitting it. What I appreciated is that previously it felt like, you know, you could see it from two different perspectives. It might feel like the Planning Commission was reviewing schematics that then changed, and developers might feel like they were pushed to show too much before they had priced it and knew that they could build it.
Right.
And this feels a little more, a little clearer. You know, we're reviewing conceptual, and then we actually, then the fact that you can go back and say, wait, you've changed.
I can see that being exactly the case. That's why I say I'm a little bit hesitant at this point to say what this is going to look like when I don't know what it's going to look like. That's all. That's my
Yeah.
main concern.
Well, I mean, and you'll know what it looks like. I mean, because the information that it's a lot of information we're requiring, but as far as the detailed engineering of that, we're not asking for that. But you will, if you read the information that we're asking for you to submit, it's a lot of information.
Okay.
And I believe you'll have a very, very, very good idea, of some good knowledge about how it's going to be developed, how it'll look like.
Okay.
The thing that we're trying to do is focus much more on the planning efforts, and then the detailed engineering, again, that be done after the site plan has been approved, and then you go to that next step where you detail out, because if you look at the submittal of requirements for the site plan, then the detailed site plan, which is all the details, you'll see that it's similar, just refined to a large degree to engineering and architectural standards.
Now, will it come back the second time to the P and Z?
It will not. It will not.
Okay. Scott, were you listening when Wayne was reading the steps? You're the only engineer we've got in the house tonight. When he was mentioning, I know you've complained a lot of times about not getting, changes in information until 2 hours before the meeting of changes that need to be done. Did you listen to the steps that Wayne was mentioning?
I did, and I wasn't really going to speak. We just follow rules that we're given to follow. I did follow what was being asked, and my 2 cents is with Fairhope. Fairhope's one of the few cities that I know of that takes a site plan to Planning Commission and then to City Council. Personally, I don't think that's necessary at all to go to City Council. I think we get bogged down by doing that, and it just kind of extends the process, and I don't really think it's all that necessary. You as a body, I think should be looking at just what Wayne was saying, the overall big picture of the planning. Does it fit in with the city's comprehensive plan and what your desires are as a city, not the nuts and bolts of drainage and utilities and things like that. That's what staff is for. A lot of cities, Planning Commission doesn't even see site plans. If it's zoned for what you're trying to do, it goes to staff for permitting, and they iron out whether or not it meets the requirements, and that's what most cities do, actually. So I think I'm excited to see you going through this process, just because we as engineers, we'd love to get paid to design the whole thing right off at the beginning and send it to you, but the reality is as a developer, you wouldn't want to pay that much to present something that might not meet the qualifications, or may change through the planning process. It may meet the qualifications, but due to public input and your input and all that, you may end up with a better product, but then the developer has to pay to make all these changes to it. So I like this new. If you take it a step further and take the city council out of it, I think that would be a good idea, but that's.
How would you feel about having to conduct a meeting before you went ahead with the project?
Oh, I'm glad to do that. We do that. Often may not be the right word, but if we know something's going to be maybe not controversial, but affect a lot of people and have a lot of input, I'm glad to do that, because that just, I'd rather do that in a controlled environment where we're able to talk to each other around the table, us being the developer and engineers and the public, versus here where things get heated and you have to be so formal with, addressing the chairman versus addressing the question and things like that. I think it's a great idea. We would gladly do that.
That's one thing I like about this, because I've heard engineers such as yourself complain about not finding changes until the day of the meeting or a few hours before, and then, the public complains coming in saying they hadn't even seen the site plan until the meeting.
Right, and then it puts you in a bad position of
And so a lot of
waiting.
times, they've been talking among themselves and think that what's going in is something totally different than what's actually occurring.
Exactly.
Thank you, Scott. I
You're
didn't
welcome.
mean to put you on the
Thank you.
spot like that, but I appreciate that. I've got a couple of questions, Wayne. And these are some items that kind of we mentioned on the phone today, and Ken, if you're paying attention, the criteria on page 6, 1 through 9 on the top, lines 91 through 209, there's a lot fewer criteria than on the original site plan review, but the prior legal, if Holly remembers, would always tell us on the site plan reviews, we haven't had any recently, for the most part, but hey, if they meet the building requirements and all the ordinances, that we pretty much have to approve it, just like if a subdivision meets the subdivision regs. Basically, hey, if it meets the building code and the tree ordinance, et cetera, that we have to approve it, and that any reason we deny, we have to pretty much pull an ordinance out or something along those lines. But my question is, in here for denial, it says property value, the last item on 5. Number 6, it has traffic generation and flow. And number 7, potential adverse impacts on the environment resulting from development. Every single subdivision we have that somebody comes and speaks against, the 3 things they say is, it's going to affect my property values, it's going to make, horrible water runoff, and I don't want the traffic. And, based on, and I guess, Kim, my question is, and I would prefer just if we just omitted and put a period after potential physical impacts and left property values out. I don't know if, I have lunch with the Neil Vera every Monday, and, we make bets on real estate that people buy over the past 20 years, and we've each been wrong and right about half the time. I mean, it's just, what's going to affect the property values. I mean, if we knew that, we would be as wealthy as Donald Trump investing in real estate. If we knew what was going to potentially affect property values, we could go long or we could go short, and we could make a fortune. So I would like personally to leave property values out. That kind of makes me, break out in a rash a little bit. But Ken, I guess my question is, if something comes to us and we deny it because we say, hey, we think that the water runoff's going to really be bad, that there's a, downhill, there's a potential, even though their engineer said, hey, we can handle the water on this site, but we say, gosh, environmentally, we don't like this for whatever reason, gosh, anyway, any vacant piece of property that's developed is going to generate more traffic. I mean, no matter what you do. I mean, if you put a shopping center there or a single-family house, it's going to either generate one more car or 50 more cars. So, basically, we could deny anything being developed if it's not, a shopping center being redeveloped to residential, that, hey, it's going to be more traffic, or it's going to be this, and who knows about property values. But if we denied something because of traffic, or denied something because we said, hey, environmentally, we just, even though the engineers and Richard Peterson and the staff are fine with it, and he's an engineer and he's fine with it, and the engineers for the developer are fine with it, as a city council, we just don't feel comfortable with it. Or as a P&Z, we just don't, well, city council, not us, we're just making a recommendation, so we're off the hook. But the city council comes back and accepts our recommendation, or they don't, and they say, we're just really concerned about this environmentally. We're concerned about this because of traffic, even though the staff engineers said that's
Right.
fine, et cetera. I mean, what kind of footing are we on?
That's true.
No,
Wouldn't the traffic be based on the traffic study? If it's, I guess it's
Well, if you look
clarifying
at our-
what
Well, if you look at our
criteria.
traffic study, all we require is a traffic study. And the traffic study is simply, do we need an ingress, egress lane, or this or that? We can't deny a subdivision based on the traffic study. We just tell them, you gotta put a light in, or you've gotta have an ingress lane or an egress lane, but we
But that
can't
looks like
deny
what
it.
we're reviewing, the adequacy of ingress and egress.
Right, that part I don't have a problem with. We can tell
Okay.
them they need a turning lane. You know, we can tell them they need a speed up lane to get in the traffic, you know, but we can't deny a subdivision because, hey, it's gonna increase the traffic. Of course, it's gonna increase the traffic. We can just say, you need a traffic study so we can handle the traffic as well as we possibly can handle it. But we can't say, you know, the traffic studies don't say you can't put this here. But my concern is along those lines, and I mean, what,
Well, I think these are appropriate criteria for making a decision. What you're pointing out is there may not be an evidentiary basis to say, hang your hat on, well, we don't think this is good for the environment, though, even though every engineer in the room says it's not going to be a problem environmentally, or it's unlikely to be a problem environmentally. I think you can use these criteria generally, but your decisions have to be consistent with the evidentiary basis before you. When you move away from that is where you'll get in trouble. These aren't so vague that they're standardless. And the zoning, the enabling statute for zoning ordinances provides a very broad policy basis that zoning ordinances are based on. That's for the general welfare and safety of the public. I think these are all valid considerations that fit within that. But if you're going to use one of these considerations to make a recommendation for denial, there's got to be a satisfactory evidentiary basis for it. If there's not, you can't do it.
Oh, thank heavens.
You repeat that, please.
There we go. These are, as I take it, these are criteria for you and then the city council to consider in evaluating a site plan. I think, and under the standards for the adoption or amendment of a zoning ordinance, they're fairly broad. They must advance the health, safety, morals, or general welfare. And I think we probably could all agree that these subject matters fit within those. What you're speaking to is in exercising your discretion to approve or deny, there has to be an evidentiary basis or a factual basis for that decision. No, you couldn't reject a proposal simply because you think without factual support it's bad for the environment when the entire record before you says we've taken sufficient protections to not harm the environment, as an example.
Jay, y'all want to see these at the city council and extend your meetings and and get beat up as much as we do on these? I mean, I kind of agree with Scott. I don't know why y'all want to see these. Politically, they're not going to, you know, make y'all any friends, and they're going to extend your meetings longer.
We have friends, is that a possibility? You know, I mean, I think if we see them now, I think we probably need to keep seeing them. I mean, I don't know that I want to keep seeing them, but, you know, that's the process and that's the plan. I think we should keep that in place.
I think the difference right now is that they're seeing just a blank rezoning, and you don't know what use is going to be there.
No, and we had this come up recently, and I said something to you then. I mean, I think the idea of having some tangible idea of what this property is going to be if and when rezoned is very helpful to us, and it's very helpful to the public that's there discussing or worried about that issue. And the idea that if they don't comply or start that site plan within a year after approval, then it reverts, the zoning reverts back. I think that's a great idea.
I think so, but I think that there's a bigger, longer picture to it though also, Jay, in the sense that, you know, yes, you know what's coming out of the chute immediately, but on the other hand, you know, once that person originally gets it rezoned because Tim Simmons is putting a insurance office there, and he gets it rezoned B2, but puts his insurance office there and decides in 5 years he's going to retire and rents it to a bar, if the bar meets B2, then, I mean, it's an insurance office for 3 years until he decides to release it. So even though coming out of the chute, it looks nice that, hey, we've got an insurance office coming here, and they've got to put the insurance office there within 12 months, that zoning, once that insurance office is there, goes on for the next 100 years. So that's my, this thing doesn't give quite as much protection as you think it does, and you still got to look at the zoning. When you rezone, you really want to look at the zoning and what's there, and does our zoning really do in Fairhope what we want it to do? Because, this is not, we're not doing these as PUDs,
If I could add real quick, just one clarification. As far as the use goes, it's not a specific use, it's in a use category. We have use categories in our ordinance, and if you read A1A on the proposal, it talks about Article 3B, Table 3.1, which are these use categories. So if you got approved for this use category, that's what the uses that are allowed in that use category are what you're going to be allowed to do. So we're not going to be having it detailed down to a insurance office.
What's the difference in that and just the zoning? Because the zoning has that same list as well, right?
Well, if you look at, in our use tables, they're broken down into certain use categories. And under those use categories, you've got the specific uses on there. Professional offices, I believe, is one of those. And you have, under that, you have the uses that are consistent with that use category, if that makes sense to you. So it's not going to be, we don't envision this being a specific particular use. It's in this category of uses that are all similar. They're all similar in nature, but they're not going to be a specific use.
So in other words, it won't say State Farm office, it would say insurance, professional office.
Professional office.
But then if he got the B4 based on that professional office, built the building, and retires 2 years later, then anything that B4 allows would be allowed, or anything that B2, if he got B2, would be allowed at that point.
I would tell you that anything that he got approved for in that use category, he could do that. And when you go beyond that, that's when you start deviating from that initial approval. Does that make sense?
Not if it's zoned B4. I mean, are we going to have it zoned B4 with the conditional use category?
Yes, I mean, essentially what this will be doing is you get it zoned B4, and now obviously the category of uses has to be consistent with B4, but you're narrowing that down. You're narrowing down the uses that would be allowed to those category of uses. Does that make sense? So we're kind of funneling, you get the zoning, you're funneling it down to the category of uses, which are your site plans based on.
So then when the individual, and we'll keep picking on Tim since he's the new guy, has retired and he finds a tenant for his building, and the tenant, puts the cardboard paper up and it's all exciting, and the tenant comes in and starts for his grand opening, and it doesn't meet in that use category, the city's going to go back and shut him down and have the guts and the confidence and the political wherewithal to do that.
Well, hopefully before he gets his business license, he'll be talking to us about that, about what the use is. And again, I mean, this is.
I'm just devil's advocate.
I understand.
I'm very supportive of this. I just want people to know what we're
Right.
doing and what we're getting into. And
Right.
again, I wish that we had, 10 more engineers in here and, 100
Right.
people from the public, honestly.
And I guess the whole intent here is that we got a lot of feedback. I've been here for 9 or 10 months now. Get a lot of feedback on some of these rezonings on Greeno, for example, and some other places that are highly visible to the public and so forth. During my whole career, it's always been very difficult because somebody will come in and say, hey, we want to get it rezoned, and it's going to look like this, it's going to be beautiful, it's going to be this and that, and then they get it rezoned, and it's whatever is allowed and whatever they want it to look like that meets the minimum requirements. I think we're trying to tailor it down a little bit, so during the approval process, we're not just making decisions based on what they're showing us they're going to do. We're making decisions based on what they're going to do. And if they don't do that, then we've got to go back and take a step back and, reevaluate
I
it.
appreciate that. I think that that's the biggest regret that I have is so many things that we've approved and what actually is being built is not what we've been provided. The plans, the whole rigmarole. And then when we go and look at it, it's not what we approved, and that's,
Right.
and I want to know what we have to, what is our repercussions on that? Who's following that up? Who's making sure that all of that is exactly the way we were presented?
Right. As we go forward in the future, this is, as we refine our planning here, we've talked before about form-based codes, and form-based codes is a very good tool because it's very detailed. The public realm you're looking at is very detailed. Everything's very detailed. When you have that, then you can back off a little bit of some of these things because the form of the building is very well described and required, and so then you can kind of take a step back to where you're not having to have things like this because the public realm, what you see, is very well defined, and so as you go forward, you meet those standards, it makes it much, much easier. And then we can maybe back off this a little bit because we are already sort of saying, here's how it needs to look in this location. It needs to have a build-to line, not a setback line, and things of that nature, and street trees, and, all those things. But as we go forward, we'll delve into that over the next few years as we kind of define that process.
I've worked with form-based codes, and I suspect Rebecca has too. My experience is that they work better in sort of a place that's already developed, like a downtown Fairhope area, where you're doing infill development and redeveloping within, trying to stay part old and part new. I think you're going to have a different approach when you start dealing with the subdivisions along 181, because while most people know about downtown Fairhope and follow Greeno, many people say, there's this development on 181? It's like another world to them out there. You're going to have to come up, and I don't mean that in any negative context, but I mean, you're going to have to come up with sort of a different way of look. I don't think form-based codes are going to have the same application in that situation. In my experience, they won't, but.
Right. Well, and that's true. I mean, form-based codes in a city can take multiple forms depending on where you're at in the city. A form-based code downtown would look different than a form-based code on Greeno Road. A form-based code on 181 would look different than the form-based code on Greeno Road. Because it all starts with a regulating plan. That regulating plan can be different, and then also the building types could be different. There's a lot of different things you go into that you're trying to make sure that plan you're proposing is going to be consistent with the area you're trying to put it in. It's not a one-size-fits-all, as Dr. Thayer mentioned. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It has to be tailored, and it has to be kind of synchronized to each location, and that's the beauty of potentially having a consultant come in who we have all these ideas and ways it used to be and our preconceived notions, and it's nice to bring somebody in with a fresh perspective and say, this was, as a professional designer, this is what I'm seeing. But that's something down the road, the form-based code. I think it's an exciting, it's not new, but it's new for Alabama and new for Southeast to some degree, but I think it's something we'll need to explore, and if it fits for Fairhope, it'd be great. If it doesn't, then we'll need to take other steps. There's multiple ways to do good planning, and it's not one size fits all, and it's not the typical Euclidean zoning like we see now where uses are separated. I think at some of these areas, the mixed use concepts are very good, and walkability is a key, and having a interesting public realm from the street, and encouraging walkability and different housing types, and those kind of things are I think are the trend to thriving cities in America, and I think if we want to keep that direction, I think those are things we have to consider and embrace, or at least discuss at some point.
I think this is a great job, and I totally agree with everything Holly said. In my comments, I'm just trying to get this out,
Sure.
kind of, because at some point the rubber's going to hit the road. The only thing I don't feel comfortable with this whole item is I would personally like to just leave the word property values out. But I won't.
And Mr. Chairman, I have no problem if the planning commission,
I just don't.
that's a minor issue to me.
I just don't see how we can, predict that. I wish we could. And the other thing, I think if we do this, I think we really need to look at our subdivision regs very, very carefully. I don't think we want to have what happened in like Boulder or Gainesville and get a real big halo around, Fairhope. I think that we need to do whatever we can in our subdivision regs requiring very, very large lots, as large as we think can be legal, and try to put as much emphasis on things coming in the city limits as possible. Otherwise, when we do something like this, that sort of typical Alabama independent property rights, nobody can tell me what I can do with my property. of course, the hypocrisy of it, but nobody around me better do anything to affect my property values or what I like. You know, I think that this would really probably want people to stay out of, you know, urge people to, they would think that they should stay out of the city limits to have the freedoms to do with their property what they would like to.
Right.
And I think the more that we can do to encourage people to come in the city limits to keep from having a real issue on Highway 181 with, you know, laundromats that don't look like what we want to look and Dollar Generals that don't look like what we want them to look. I think the more we can do with our subdivision regs to try to urge people to come in the city limits in conjunction with this, the more effective this will be.
I had a slightly different, but to address your concern and Holly's concerns about things changing. You know, we like the fact that there was the conceptual architectural plans in the beginning. What I don't see, it looks like the detailed development plan is when we're reviewing to see if those have changed substantially in a way that would be detrimental. But I don't see a requirement for then the detailed architectural elevations to be included. It has floor plans and size and
Right.
footprint, but not elevations.
You know, in discussing that, but we didn't get into the detailed architectural elevations, even because we don't really have any architectural controls. So we have nothing to review those against.
Well, then, so this is,
The only thing we have reviewed against would be the conceptuals.
so then we're supposed to be, your substantial changes would be a change of architectural style that would make the project less compatible with neighboring uses. But how can you tell that from a floor plan?
They would be strictly based on the conceptuals. If the conceptuals change to a point where the whole project is, I mean, again, that's a judgment call. So if the conceptuals change to a point where it's not similar,
Yeah.
that would trigger that.
Well, no, I think we're in agreement where I know there's not a, you know,
Right.
we're not trying to establish, you know, design standards, but I'm just saying, you submit the conceptual or you review that, then you submit the detailed. What do you have to compare the conceptual to if you don't require elevations
True.
in the detailed?
And that's something that, I mean, if the planning commission feels that's appropriate, we can certainly add that to close that circle as well. We can do that.
It just,
Okay, we'd be happy to do that.
Excellent point.
Yeah,
Addresses
because
Holly's
the conceptual
concerns.
plans are all we've ever had, and that's all we've had to go on, but they've been slightly different with the finished product.
yeah.
In a lot of different ways, but, so this is very transparent, much clearer, cleaner. I think it'll help all parties.
Anybody else have any questions or concerns? If not, it sounds like Holly's moving toward a motion.
Well, we have a few things that we're going to add too.
Wayne, did you anticipate running this again and making whatever changes were discussed up here?
I had not. We can make the changes that have been discussed are very simple changes. We can make those. I had not anticipated bringing it back again. I think we have some urgency to move this forward, so we would like to move it forward as quickly as we can. We'd be glad to make the changes.
What you would be looking for, Mr. Chairman, is a motion that would be contingent on
Changes discussed.
changes
Yes,
that Emily has
So diligently written down.
documented.
correct. Anybody want to make a motion to include your?
Oh, yeah,
your,
I got it. I would,
Can I make one more quick comment as one of the changes, something that, in listening to Ken talk about general welfare, it's in the statute. I would like to, just to close that circle as well, add number 10 to the criteria to mention that general welfare, what the statute says. Is that appropriate, Ken?
Sure.
And it's just a general statement, take it straight from the state statute, general welfare, and whatever he mentioned, just to close that out, to make sure we are being consistent with the state statute.
okay, and this is a recommendation
Yes.
to the city council.
Council.
I would make a motion to recommend to the city council that we approve case number ZC 17.15 site plan review amendment, subject to the contingent on the changes being made to this document that we have discussed this evening.
Okay, I just want to run over those real quick. So
Okay.
Number 10, the general welfare, to to E, criteria of review, then adding the detail for.
Architectural plans.
Architectural renderings, and I have one more.
I like
And 5.
property values
Property
dropped off
values.
five
Yeah,
if the other
Removing property
commissioners.
values.
And also including in the CBD and commercial districts, adding that commercial districts in there.
And that in the event that a permit's not pulled
The
within a
reversion area.
year, that it will revert, well, I guess it doesn't can't automatically revert. Staff will just have to take it back to city
Yeah,
council.
now.
So however you need to word that.
In the past, I've been told you can't automatically revert back, you have to go through the
Right.
process to change it back.
Right. Yeah, that would be a conditional zoning, and I don't think that's.
Okay. I've got a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
I will abstain on the motion.
Any nays? And one abstention with Ralph Thayer. Other than that, it's unanimous. Or I guess that is unanimous. Next item is EC 1716, public hearing to request some changes for procedures for our zoning amendments.
This is a very simple change. As it currently stands right now, I believe the developer brings in the adjoining property, the mailing list for the adjoining property owners. We mail it out. All we're trying to do is have them mail it out. And then in return for that, we get what's called an affidavit of compliance, where they sign an affidavit saying they have done that, and they give us all the particulars, the list, when it was mailed, all the particulars to the mailing, and also the posting of the sign.
Will you get the verification of receipt of a certified letter?
Yes. I think that's on line 34. Yeah, but certified mail receipts.
Yeah, I got it.
All right, I'll go ahead and open the public hearing at this time. Does anybody wish to speak to ZC 1716? If not, I'll close the public hearing and turn the meeting back over to the commissioners. Yeah, go ahead. Public hearing's still open, I'm sorry.
1716, it's misplaced out of my pack, but this is in regards to notifying
Yes.
property owners of a rezoning change or whatever.
Right.
There was some discussion, I'm not sure if it was in the planning commission meeting or in the town hall meetings, about extending that notification. Is that put into this ordinance? Because right now, it's just adjacent property owners, but if I live 2 streets over, I don't get a notification of that.
Yeah, the way it's stated right now, it's taken from the ordinance. All we're saying is, instead of us mailing it, they're mailing it. And the distances haven't changed in that.
300 feet.
300
Yeah,
feet.
but the distance hasn't changed when it has been. It's 300 feet, as Emily mentioned. And this has come up a lot. I mean, during my career, how far is far enough? We post a sign on the property, so a sign's posted as well, saying zoning change, what have you, whatever the proposal or request is, that's there. It's on social media from the city's website, I believe. The agendas are published, We could go beyond that, but it's going beyond state law.
All property owners associations getting email.
They do. Yeah, all
So
POAs
state
get
law
it.
governs how far
Yes.
you can extend that out, but you
Right.
can't exceed state law?
I would defer to the attorneys on that. I've always tried to comply with the state law consistently, but I'll leave that to Ken to make that decision. I'm supposing you could probably go out as far as you wanted to. But historically, we've always done what state law requires.
I think you can go beyond, but obviously must adhere to the minimum.
Well, and I guess I would just request that we maybe vet that a little bit more, because there has been some concern about that before you vote on it, and just see, and maybe this could be discussed at one of the mayor's town hall meetings. Had the same situation in my neighborhood. I didn't get a request for it. Now, the sign, as you know, is, it's basically not much bigger than a postcard, but I mean, I think people who know can recognize those signs, understand that, hey, I need to pay attention to this. I think there are a lot of people that don't recognize what those signs are. And the problem with the website now is, there's so much look, there's so many places now. I mean, you can't depend on the city website for all your information. There's all this social media out there, whether it's the mayor's blog, whether it's the mayor's Facebook page, whether it's the city's Facebook page. There's not one place you can go to get all this information. So I guess I'll just ask you to vet that a little bit more and see if you can meet some of the citizens' concerns on that before you actually vote on it. And I'm not sure what all those recommendations would be, but.
And it's from staff's perspective, whatever the wishes are of the planning commission, I guess my one question is, how far is far enough? I mean, is it 100 feet more? Is it 400 feet more? I mean, now, when you start doing notices, obviously, the more you send, the more it costs to send. So that's a consideration as well. But, I mean, from our perspective, I don't think we
Well, I
really
do
care how
like,
far we go out.
You know, the number 2 of your process, the community meeting, but that's after the fact, you know, where they get involvement, but.
Yeah, the community meeting would happen before the application, which would be before the notices go out. So so you would do a notice for the community meeting as well.
Okay, so the community meeting happens before, as
That's
well
right.
as the email out to the HOA or.
That's all toward in the process and preparation for the planning commission meeting. When it goes to the POAs, when the application is submitted and formalized, that's when those notices go out to the joining, today, when it goes out to the joining property owners and goes out to the POAs and all. The community meeting would also, you know, the way it's proposed is pre-application conference, community meeting, and that community meeting would have an advertising requirement as well.
I'll go ahead. You satisfied? You have anything else to say? If not, I'm going to close the public hearing at this time.
I've got a question.
Oh, yes.
Would you give us your name, tell us what your involvement is?
Your name and,
I'm sorry, what?
T.J. Murphy?
Uh-huh.
and what is your address for the record? I should have asked you that when he came up. I apologize. Okay, if you just tell her after, that'd be great. Okay, all right, in that case, I'll go ahead and I'll close the public hearing at this point. And commissioners, I'm supposed to get that for our records, so if you give it to Emily after the meeting, that's fine. Commissioners, do I have a motion? Any questions, concerns?
I'd like to, TJ, does that, hearing that there would be a community meeting prior to this process that would allow your input as to what is being done here, does that ease your mind any as opposed to?
To some extent it does. It depends on how we're notified. I mean, the notification process of when these community meetings are, there's a huge problem.
Right.
So you're saying that really the people who are notified via mail or by that sign, let me step back. People are notified via mail that there will be a community meeting, is that right?
Yeah,
Then that's the problem, which
Yeah.
I'm not really happy with, because it doesn't extend out enough to notify those people. And look, Fairhope shouldn't be a developer's dream, right? I mean, and I agree, this is the first step in putting a bigger barrier of entry on those developers by saying, hey, you need to mail these out. That shouldn't be the city's problem. So that these are bigger scope because there are bigger people involved in it. And, you know, a bigger area. I don't know what that area is, but I think it needs to be thought about a little bit more before we vote on it. I mean, that's all I'm saying. I don't know what that area, I don't know what that size is.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think there is that you can definitively say that it is 300 feet or 800 feet or 2 miles. You've got to draw the line, and the line, for the most part, historically has been drawn. It has worked fairly well.
It has not worked very well.
Well, it maybe hasn't worked very well for you, but in a lot of other instances, it has worked very
I
well.
would say, in your opinion, it's worked very well, but I'll tell you, from a citizen standpoint, it has not worked very well.
Okay, well, that's your opinion.
What if,
Strictly your opinion, you don't have any science to back that up.
what if we check out our website and try to polish that up a little bit, be a little more progressive, a little more forward, not
Sure.
relying on hearsay of different things on Facebook?
We can certainly
but
explore that. I mean,
Maybe, you know, and really put that out there to the public. You know, it's your responsibility as a citizen to, you know,
Right.
to do your due diligence as well, but also have a reliable resource for our citizens.
Sure.
Do we know if there are other areas around us that extended this limit or this barrier?
I'm not aware of any. At the county, we did not. It was state law, minimum state law at the county. When I was with the county, that's been 8, 9 years ago now, what we also had was called a listserv. And it was, it's a sign-up email notice. You would go in and sign up, and then every meeting, you get a copy of the agenda sent to you automatically. When we posted the agenda online, it went out to everybody who signed up for it. We probably had close to 1,000 people who were getting those automatic notices. Now, that's software that we use for a number of other uses outside of planning. I don't think we have that in Fairhope. It
We've
can
got
be,
something pretty similar to that.
yeah.
If I can speak to that, I do have an email notification list that we do update regularly with property owners, neighborhood groups, and anybody that wants to be added to it, they just need to let me know.
Anybody who wants, and we announce that from time to time. How many people are on that list now, Emily?
Probably a couple hundred. But of course, a lot of people say, send it to my property owners association, and the property owners association then distributes it to their group, as opposed to us having every single subdivision email address.
The problem,
I send
yeah.
the full agenda out, as well as the full packet that you get is posted to the website and part of that email.
And Emily, that goes out to everybody on that list regardless of, as to whether or not it's their neighborhood or not.
That's
Yes,
correct.
That is correct.
And that goes out normally that goes out the day before or the day after or the day that we receive our packets.
It typically goes, the same time you get yours is when it goes out to the neighborhood.
Right, because I get that email as well, and it's usually within a day, one way or the
Mr. Chairman,
other.
can I ask Jeff, our IT director, to speak to an issue that may help with this? Jeff?
Certainly.
Yeah, I was just back there recording the meeting and kind of heard this conversation. Mayor Wilson, several months ago, wanted to purchase a notification system for the city. Council's already approved it. We're in the implementation stages of it. What this system will allow you to do is citizens can be notified on whatever you want them to be notified on. So if you want to notify them on a planning change, you can mark the property where the zoning change is going to be and draw a circle around it, 50 feet, 100 feet, 1,000 feet, doesn't matter. Put the message in, press a button, and the notification's sent out to those folks. They're in that circle.
They've signed up for it.
To sign up for it, right. So we don't, yeah, I see what you're saying. There's so many places where all the notifications are right now, Facebook, Twitter, website. If we can just, we're going to try to consolidate all notifications under one umbrella of this new notification system. And we should be live within a month on this new system.
That's excellent.
Yeah, we
So-
just have to do a really good job of educating people and letting them know this is how this information is going to be disseminated from here on out. So
Exactly.
They know that to get that information, they've got to sign up for whatever, and I forget what it was called now. It was,
Everbridge.
okay.
Yeah, we've got our own name for it that we're working on. And we're going to try to do our best to market this, let everybody know to go to this website, sign up. We're going to have all kinds of lists of, on different categories they can sign up for. So it could be zoning change, it could be, whatever else is dealt with in the planning department.
I mean, obviously,
Can be there.
When you're dealing with something like this, the more people that can get the information, the better. I mean, I understand this is what state law requires,
Yeah.
but if we can, if something happens on my street that's 400 feet away, I'm not going to get notified that something's going on because I'm outside that 300. I might be a little upset about that. So if there's a way to, and this sounds like a pretty good way to do that, then I'd like to see us be able to do it.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you,
All
that's
right.
excellent news. Commissioner, I don't see where the one has to do with the other. We can certainly pass this to get this process moving, and then it'd be easy enough to change, would be another amendment to change the 300 feet to whatever, feet we think we want to change it to later if we later decide to make that change, so.
Or it can stay like it is, and you can just put that system.
Exactly.
Put that system together,
I agree.
and that's just a different way from notification.
Well, we'd have a legal notice, and we'd have a courtesy notice is how I would see that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Legal notice would be based on state statute. The other would be a courtesy notice based on city policy.
And again, we also have the listserv that Emily has that goes out to anybody that signed up for that too, so.
That also goes out to all of the media outlets that have also requested. I know Georgia Boats gets it and she posts it to her website. She even announces and goes over our agenda when she gets it on air as well.
As long as what, it sounds like we have it going out to multiple different places through multiple different outlets. As long as those outlets are all consistent in putting out the same information, I think that's great.
We'll have a motion. Any other concerns, questions? If not, I'll accept a motion.
I would move that Planning Commission recommend to the City Council to accept zoning case 1716, application procedures for zoning amendment.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay.
Chairman, can I make one quick comment? It was mentioned earlier before the meeting about these changes, and just to kind of have y'all, let you guys know, once these are approved by the city council, we will go back and we will amend the zoning ordinance to reflect these changes, and so it'll be updated. So as we get through these, we'll keep updating the ordinance that's online, and so the one you see online will be the updated version with all the changes that we've made. From the long term, we are moving towards what we're calling a unified development ordinance, where you have your subregs and your zoning ordinance in one. It's fairly traditional to do it that way. We already have that. We had a writer help us with that. We have that copy. We're just waiting to get some of these changes made, and then we will migrate to that unified ordinance at some point over the next year or so. But that's, we want to get most of these out of the way first, and then we'll move to just the reorganization of the ordinance once we get these, a substantial part of these amendments done. So just want to give you guys a heads up about where we're going with that.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, next up, SD 1727. Is that Nancy? Good. Get to see a new face for a change.
Thank you. This is a request of HMR for plat approval. It's a minor subdivision, so it'd be preliminary and final plat approval of Point Clear Village, a 3-lot minor subdivision. It's located on the south side of County Road 32, one parcel east of the intersection of County Road 32 and Scenic Highway 98. It's a very simple 3-lot minor subdivision. We didn't have any conditions of approval listed, and that's it.
Thank you. Scott, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Scott Hutchison with HMR. I'll just, like Nancy said, it's very simple, taking 2 lots and making 3, so I'll just answer any questions if you have.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and open the public hearing at this time then. Does anybody wish to speak to this subdivision or have any questions about this subdivision? Anyway, nobody signed up, I don't guess. In that case, I'll close the public hearing at this time. Turn the meeting over to the commissioners. Nancy, I just have one question. What is in the county? I just have one question. In the county, what are the minimum lot square footages?
For us, it's 15,000 square feet.
For this is zone RMF6 in the county, and the square footages depend upon what you're going to do. You're allowed up to 6 units per acre. This total site is 1 acre, so you're allowed 6 units. We're talking about breaking it into 3 lots, which would be 2 units per lot. And the county has a table that if you do 2 units on 1 lot, that lot has to be 13,000 square feet. If you do 1 unit on that lot, it's 6,500 square feet. So it's a little confusing, but there's a table associated with that. But what we're proposing would be a 13,000 square foot minimum lot, so,
Okay.
which is what you have in front of you.
Thank you, Scott. Commissioners, any questions, concerns? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll move approval of the City Council of zoning case SD 17.27 Point Clear Village.
I've got a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right, the motion passes unanimously. Next item up, you are 1704, 115211, utility review for 11,306 linear feet of CATV cable through the water subdivision.
Pretty much you said it all. Mediacom is installing CATV cable, 11,306 feet, 48 pedestals within the right-of-way.
Okay, this is not a public hearing, is it?
No, it's not. There are 3 conditions of approval. Those are our general comments. We do have a new condition that the contractor shall attend a pre-construction meeting with the city departments prior to the issuance of a right-of-way permit. Any questions?
Any questions for Emily? Anybody in the public wish to speak to this? And is there anybody here for Mediacom? I guess not. All right. Commissioners? I'll always look at Richard for these.
Why are they getting permission from us to do that?
It's required by state law.
Statute.
There's
To run a
statute.
utility?
Yeah, to extend any utility, you have to get an 115211 review. And I don't think there's generally a lot of teeth in them. And I used to think it was kind of a waste of our time to do these. And then we've had a number of incidents. There's one where Gary Moore said, you know, that's going right through private property because down on Scenic Highway 98, the right-of-ways are really kind of odd and awkward. So I think it's just kind of a more or less a heads up for, you know, you city people, as many people as possible to know, hey,
Second set of eyes, I guess.
this is coming down the pike in case, you
Very
know.
nice. Is this in the city of Fairhope?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, and also, we had a discussion during the DRC about sometimes you have some of these borings, they're making some of these borings that are hitting some of our water and sewer and so forth.
AT&T hit our force main on Morphy and Thompson Hall Road, and then they went through a gravity lateral just another 200 feet away.
And I think that's one of the benefits of this process as well, is that we can look at those ahead of time and talk to them about those. Obviously, the contractor does most of the work, but I think there's some benefit to it.
Yeah, there are times when I remember Jennifer would tell somebody she wanted them to bore
Trees.
instead of trenching or bore deeper for this reason or that. So that-
Trees or something
Yeah,
like that.
trees or something, sewer line or something, so that's.
Well, I know
why-
we do a right-of-way permit, right? I mean, we do have that.
Yeah. So that's why I always kind of look at you on these since you're the city.
As long as they don't tear our stuff up, I don't really care. I did want to look at the right-of-way permit, just as a matter of information. I'm thinking that the right-of-way permit going forward, we would like to have video evidence that they haven't torn anything up. We have storm drains and we have gravity sewer lines that aren't going to start spewing, you know, anything if they get hit. But, you know, maybe 6 months, maybe a year, maybe 3 or 4 years, we get a big sinkhole somewhere that's caused from this damage. And if there's a way to get video confirmation they haven't torn anything up, I just think that's an opportunity that we could put into the permitting process. I think it'd be worth our time to make sure it's done that way. But I know it costs more to the people doing the work, but I mean, you know, to the people that are damaged by that, though, I mean, there's not enough money to require that kind of security, so that's my 2 cents. I make a motion we approve. Can we go ahead and approve the other one, too, while we're doing that? Or is that a separate one?
We can, since it's not a public hearing, you
I
can
know
make
my
a
stomach's
motion.
growling, though, Ken.
Well, let's do one motion. Let's do one motion, let's do another motion afterwards.
I make a motion, we approve UR 1704, request from Mediacom for cable through the water subdivision.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
My only discussion is it's a completely, I mean, there may be 3 lots left in the development, but then Fairhope Falls that we get into is not completely finished, so, you know, I'm sure they go by all the same guidelines, but that would be the only difference.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Emily is 1705, basically the same as 1704?
Other than it's outside city limits, and it's also
Yes.
not within our permit jurisdiction.
Okay.
That's right.
So we will not be issuing a permit for that.
Is that Silver Hill?
It is for the county.
County or Silver Hill?
It's the county right of ways, but I believe it's in.
Silver Hill
Silver Hill
District.
permitting.
It's in their
Jurisdiction.
police jurisdiction, I believe there.
Why, just explain to me why we're hearing this then.
Oh, man, I was going to try to get a motion before you asked that question.
Yeah, I snuck that one in front of you, didn't I?
Thanks, Art.
Give me the Cliff Notes version of why. If it's in, is it not in Fairhope's police
It's within a
jurisdiction?
certain number of miles
Is it-
from ETJ.
It is within your planning jurisdiction. Is it in Silver Hills Police jurisdiction?
Yes.
But it's in Fairhope.
Right, but the
It's
state
in
statutes,
Address is Fairhope.
yeah, the state statute says that these reviews are done in the planning jurisdiction.
Okay.
And many times they may overlap. You might be in somebody else's
That's good.
permitting jurisdiction, but your planning jurisdiction.
That's Cliff Note version. Thank you, Wayne.
Do
Okay.
I have a I'm sorry.
As I mentioned, we, a year or so ago, we denied them to go ahead on Fairhope Falls because their water line was of the old standard, not of the new standard. And they were not happy with that.
Well, I
They
bet.
put a new- It's 7 miles from downtown.
Yeah, yeah. Fairhope has got one of the longest planning jurisdictions in this state. I think there are 2 other cities that are that way.
That's why I laughed when you brought that up.
Anybody want to make a motion?
Yeah, I move that we approve case number UR 1705, Medicom Fairhope Falls.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
Johnson, second that.
Okay. No further discussion. In that case, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Old new business, resolution 2017-01 to amend the Planning Commission bylaws regarding outside communication. We heard that at the last meeting. Any changes made to that, Wayne, or is it pretty much the
I think
same?
it's pretty much what we talked about last meeting. It's pretty much identical.
This is fairly consistent with the one that we had in the county, right?
It's not exact, but it's consistent with that, yes.
Okay.
It's not the exact language, but it's close.
Yeah, it worked really well there.
Okay. Want to make a motion?
Yeah, I would move that we approve resolution number 2017-01.
So there won't be any public discussion on this, Lou?
There was a public hearing at the last meeting.
Yes, there was, and it was advertised. So
At tonight, it was advertised as a public hearing tonight.
Okay. In that case, do I need to open in that case, I'll open a public
I
hearing.
take my motion back.
Okay, I'll go ahead. It doesn't say, I'm sorry. I'll go ahead and open a public hearing at this time. Does anybody wish to speak to this item? Basically, what we're saying is any of us commissioners who speak to anybody in the public prior to the meeting have to divulge at the meeting who we spoke to, what we spoke about, and when we spoke. Unless it's an official meeting at the city office.
Okay, and that's where I just wanted to get some clarification on it, because, and I think it's a good procedure, by the way, but it was a little confusing.
So in other words, if a developer calls and they want me and somebody else on the board to meet with Wayne and Nancy at the city office and the mayor possibly, we could sit down and meet, and in that case, we wouldn't have to necessarily divulge that we met. There'd be no reason for us not to, with transparency being the key word around Fairhope now. But if I was walking out on the property and was looking at somebody's property, and the owner of the property, who is also the developer, came out and, saw me on his property and drove his truck up and started talking to me about it, then when I come to the meeting, I would need to divulge, hey, I saw Mr. Smith at his property January 2nd while I was, walking around and looking at it, and, he discussed the project with me. And I would just have to mention that. Doesn't mean I can't talk to him or run away or that I have to abstain. It just means that I have to divulge that I saw him.
Right.
And, we had discussion, or so-and-so called me on the
good.
telephone. It doesn't mean I can't talk to them, but if I do talk to them, I've got to divulge I had a conversation with Mr. Jones, who, didn't care for this subdivision. Joe public calls me and says, hey, I don't like this, and I've just got to divulge in the meeting, hey, so-and-so called me and said, let me know that they didn't care for this.
Now, that sounds reasonable, but when I look at the language for what you're proposing here, it says, to this end, a member of the planning commission shall not voluntarily or knowingly engage in outside communication. So when I read that, it says between individuals seeking to influence the decisions of the planning commission and individual members of the planning commission in which such members discuss the merits of any matter which may be subject to the commissioner's vote. So when I read that, that's why I'm asking for clarification. When I read that, that says if I want to call Art up and say, let's talk about this, he's saying, sorry, TJ, I can't.
It really is intended to be, the way that it was written, it was intended to be that way. You're exactly right.
Yes, but.
That's what I have a problem with.
Yeah, no, that's the intention, but the issue is you might start, rattling off to Art before he can hang the phone up.
That's right.
So in that case, he's supposed to say, he's supposed to make that report during the meeting that he, had contact.
Just the attempt is to keep everything right out here in the front.
Especially,
There's no behind the scenes
and
dealings.
especially now that we're having meetings between that we're going to have meetings between the engineers and the developers and the community, it's just a lot healthier way to do it.
Well, I agree with that, but so, Wayne, you're hired by the mayor. You have conversations with the mayor about planning stuff?
Not on particular issue.
I'm not going to put, it's illogical to think that you don't. Richard, you work for the mayor. You're saying you don't have any conversation. I'm not asking you to answer that question, but that influences your decision. I can call Jay up about a decision and talk about what makes you guys different from the city council or from the planning commission about people voicing their concerns about that.
I can tell you right now, what makes us different is that we've got a resolution in front of us that says we're not going to do it.
Can I make a quick comment from the staff perspective?
Just because you can.
Now, whether or not the city council decides that they want to do the same thing, that's their prerogative too. But it got to the point, and where this all came from was when Wayne was at the county and Richard Johnson was at the county, and I was on their planning commission for an exceedingly long period of time. And what ended up happening is we had some real major conflicts come up on specific issues, especially prior to 2007, when we went into the real estate depression. But we had some massive projects that were approved. Ultimately, some were approved in the county and some were not. They were really trying to strong arm a bunch of the planning commission members. And that's where it came. You want to talk about it? Then great, let's all come right here. We'll have a discussion about it and everybody will hear the same thing. And that's what it was about.
What I appreciated about it is it doesn't say lobbying, but it's essentially, trying to put some daylight on the discussions that are had.
That's right.
And prevent sort of backroom lobbying of individual members of the planning commission to try to sway a decision instead of having an open discussion.
I could, TJ, you asked me about my communication with city staff and elected leaders of the city. Again, I go back, we said earlier, our decisions are based on the ordinance. We can't, just because somebody says we want you to do that, we can't do that. My discussions with the mayor are not on individual projects. We're talking about concepts. The site plan review, for example, those are all things that we talk about. I don't go over the agenda with the mayor or anybody else on the city council or anything else. We go through it and we're hired to give our professional advice based on the ordinance that's written, and that's what we do, and that's what we'll continue to do. That's how it's supposed to be done, so.
And I can honestly say the mayor has never called me and talked about a single agenda item since she's been mayor and said you should vote this way or what have you. I've had no comments about, any specific item on this agenda since she's been
So
mayor.
then, could I call you about a general philosophy about how you vote? What goes into your decision on voting on particular projects?
I think the general question, certainly.
The reason I ask is because several months ago, I made a request for your contact information for that very purpose, and it was sent to you. I did not receive the first call from anybody on that.
I've been doing this for a number of years. I think what you have to realize is
the people up here are citizens that are volunteering their time. I mean, they have jobs, this is not their primary responsibility. And in my experience, you know, most of the discussions should be held right here in front of everybody. So what you're going to say to them on the phone, you could say right now. I mean, we do have periods where you can make public comments. And I will tell you, I've dealt with a lot of planning commissions in my time, and they all have done a very, very good job, but they don't have the time to be talking philosophy most of the time. They have jobs to work at. And
With all due
but-
respect,
but-
and I didn't ask you that question, I asked you.
Well, I mean, listen, I'm going to defend these guys because I think they do a wonderful job, and I'm sorry that, but I will tell you that their philosophy, it's based on the ordinance. What they're looking at is based on the ordinance, not about personal philosophy. That's my 2 cents.
So I'm just curious about why you didn't respond.
So are you?
Well, I'll tell you exactly why I didn't respond. The forward of the email that I got was, what am I going to do to control growth?
Okay.
And, you know, my answer is I'm not going to do anything to control growth. It's not my job to control growth. My job is to conduct the meetings and try to enforce the city ordinances with the subdivision regs and the zoning ordinances to the best of my abilities, with the most openness that I can, without any self-serving toward me. As far as when you start talking about controlling growth, it makes it sound like, what am I going to do to try to deny subdivisions, to try to deny people their private property rights? And it sounds like it has an edge and a political direction to it, and that's why I didn't answer it. You know, if, you know, we had this number 1 right here that we met on today, that's the biggest controlling change that we've made to growth that we're recommending to the city council that I've probably seen since I've been on this board for 18 years. And if it passes the city council, then I'm going to do exactly what it says. If it doesn't pass the city council, I'm going to continue to do how we're doing right now. And that's what we do. If a subdivision meets subdivision regs, I'm going to hopefully somebody will make a motion to approve it, and hopefully it'll get approved. It's not us to say, hey, we don't want any growth in Fairhope, therefore, even though it meets the subdivision regs, let's deny it. You know, the bottom line is when we're dealing with issues like the first one on here, that's when people need to come and discuss and set the ordinances like we want to have Fairhope run, and to set the subdivision regs like we want our subdivisions develop in Fairhope, because that's basically what we enforce, and that's what the city council enforces. And if we don't, we've got people, as Ken can give you examples, that challenge us in court, and we've been challenged on 2 of them and won both of those here recently. But that's what I'm going to do, and that's my short answer.
Well, Lee, I appreciate that response. What I'm disappointed in is that you didn't have enough concern for the people that you represent to just pick up the phone and call me and explain what you just did. So that explains yours. Is anybody else?
What's the question? Why did who not call?
You
Somebody not call
you
back?
apparently didn't get it, so I probably don't need to go back through it again.
I just want to tell you, I mean, and you looked at me specifically too, because I do talk to the mayor, and you can talk to her about any conversation I've ever had with her. I don't cater to anybody.
Look,
I think the mayor
and
will
I go
answer
back to what
that
Richard
question.
was saying earlier.
I've
I
made 2
accuse
motions
anybody
on
of
this planning
anything,
commission
but
and nobody seconded.
I can call the mayor, look, I can call the mayor up and talk about an issue. I can call the councilman and talk about an issue. The only,
And you
I don't
should.
understand why I can't call you guys up, other than what Art said, is because I'm doing it because I can do it.
You can call me anytime you want to.
Well, I
Unless
can't
I'm-
call you.
Unless
You're on
I'm
the- you're on the
interpreting
planning
this
commission.
incorrectly, though, the
I don't
intent
think
is
that's
not
what
to
this
stop
resolution
us
says.
from discussing philosophy,
It does say
whether or
that?
not we have the
Right,
authority to
but
apply.
I'm saying, is
It's
this the place where you really want to talk about? I mean, do you want to sit here and have
no,
a 2-hour?
Frank.
I wouldn't think
But-
so
It's
either.
an open forum you're going to have. This is the most open, transparent forum you're going to have. It's recorded, and everybody can hear what you're saying. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't see a problem.
But the intent is specific cases, specific,
that's right.
specific site plan reviews or zoning amendments that are coming up that we're going to vote on, that we're not lobbied in private private side discussions. A general,
So this is about a specific, so if I'm talking about
If you're talking about
zoning on
philosophy,
Edwards Avenue,
okay.
that would be one. But if I want to talk about philosophy, that's something,
I believe.
right?
Yes.
Which,
Yes.
Lee, you said you did not respond to because you didn't think that was your thing. So that's my deal. We gotta, there's a real problem here between how we communicate and what you see. Wayne's point was you guys have jobs. I do too, right? Most of us do. I don't think you would be sitting up there today if you didn't think you could handle responsibilities that come with that. Jay, do you have a full-time job?
We had several.
You probably spend as much time in your councilman's job as you do in your full-time job, but you understood that was part of the responsibility going with it.
I did.
So I don't buy the fact that you have other jobs and other responsibilities. You're in this position, you're doing a good job, right? But there's an accountability part that comes with that as well. So what the intent of, when I read this, it seemed like, was that you were trying to shut down the citizens from having that voice, except when it's in this public meeting, which can be sometimes limited. And then we start talking about a philosophical issue. I don't think this is the place where you want that to happen. But I would encourage you to try to have some other forums, whether that's in the mayor's town hall meetings or whatever, to talk about what guides your ruling. And I give you an example. The planning department denied Park Place, said it didn't fit. You guys approved it. I'm sitting there going, okay, I need to kind of understand what made you kind of push one way or the other. The planning department denied, approved Edwards Street rezoning. And you guys denied that. So, there's some inconsistency there that the people in Fairhope are trying to understand. And it's not
I think
fair.
those were the
you're
two
moving in
motions
that
I made
direction.
that nobody seconded.
Pardon?
I think those were the two motions I made, nobody seconded.
Yeah,
follow the
and I forget
guidelines
what
of
to
it.
do, but again.
I
you're just
was
trying
thinking, I don't want to get
down,
off
make
on
some
too much
sense out of it.
philosophy.
I understand. We have a meeting once a year that we have open for public input. Also, accept letters. Emily puts any letters, she forwards us all emails that people send, any letters that people send, and we get quite a few of those. Any changes that you want really should go through staff and be proposed to us in that sense, and all of those ultimately go to the city council, who is really the people that you vote for and the people that have the ear in those items. We approve subdivisions, but with the exception of that, all we do is recommend to the city council that has the ultimate authority. And as far as the inconsistencies, those were items that, Wayne and I talked about. The motion that, the recommendation he made on Park Place, I would have made had I been in his position, and had he been in my position, he would have voted for the PUD. It's one of those things that there are times when the letter of the law is interpreted, and it doesn't quite make sense when when the rubber hits the road, which is why we're here. Otherwise, why not just have staff do everything?
And it's also one of those things that
And
makes it incredibly
very,
frustrating for people
and
in Fairhope to
we
figure out.
I very clearly in that meeting said what my opinions were and why I voted the way I did. Number one, that I felt like the place was an eyesore. Number two, that I'm not into trailer parks when an area is not allowed to have a shelter, since we don't have a Cat 5 shelter, were two of the major reasons that I was for that change. But I stayed it while I was for it, and that was my suggestion, to make a recommendation to the city council, and ultimately they make their decision. And you can talk to any one of them that you want to and put a sign in their yard for them or for their competitor.
And I agree with that, but now, Lee, you just told me a minute ago, told the audience a minute ago, that you're following the same ordinance, you're following the same rules that Wayne is. And now you're saying that you approved it because it was an eyesore. To me, that's not following an ordinance.
Well,
That's following the personal preference.
again, when you send an email out that says, what am I going to do to control growth, I can tell that you have an agenda, and that you obviously don't think that, that I'm doing a good job of what I'm doing, and that's fine. But with all of that said, yes, we follow the recommendations on the subdivisions. If it meets the regulations, it gets approved. If something comes in a PUD or a zoning, we make a recommendation based upon how we feel to the city council, who ultimately makes that decision. Typically, our recommendations, 19 times out of 20, will be whatever the staff recommendation is, but there are times that we stray from that. And that's part of our purview, as Ken Watson, our attorney, will tell you. That's why we're here. Otherwise, we don't need to be here. If we're going to totally agree with what the staff recommendation is 100% of the time, you don't need us.
You may be right. The other thing I want to talk about while I'm up here, which is still on the old business, is that the,
Packet was the last thing in our packet.
pardon?
We were talking amongst themselves.
There was a report.
Is this to do with the outside communication? 'Cause
It's not, so I probably need
the
to step
public-
back and kind of go on. Yeah, that's fine, I can do that.
Okay, so that's what the public hearing's about right now.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing at this time and turn the meeting over to the commissioners.
I move that this planning commission approve resolution number 2017-01.
I will second that.
Any further discussion?
I just want to clear one thing now. This is not something that prohibits anybody from calling me and talking about anything that I don't report after that conversation's been had, right?
Say it again, Richard, I'm not sure if I follow you.
I'm sorry?
Say it again, I'm not sure if I follow what you said.
I mean,
He
I
said
was-
that he
I-
can talk to the.
I can talk, if somebody calls and wants to talk about a project, whether it be utility related or not,
He just has to report.
I mean, I just have to tell somebody I talked to them, right?
That's interesting, because Richard is in the pre-application meeting, so he will, from his function as the utilities director or operations director, he will have contact.
I thought you said in official meetings that this is not applicable.
Right. And I think from his perspective, he would have, I think it's known in his official capacity with the city, he would be making those calls from the standpoint of the utilities.
And I think that our city council representative should be exempt from that.
It's got to be applied.
Well, I don't mind telling anybody, what the topic of the conversation was and what any results from that conversation were derived. I mean,
You know, Wayne,
I'm sorry?
I wouldn't have a problem with the city council liaison or Richard being exempt from this, because Richard would have to discuss, Richard's going to have to, a lot of issues he would have to discuss with people, and obviously the city council person is supposed to be able to take calls and.
And, Mr. Chairman, whatever the wishes of the planning commission are, we would be glad to go back and make whatever changes you feel necessary.
Personally, if Richard J. was contacted by somebody as it pertained to an application that was made here, then fine, they can talk to him. They just, what you would be doing henceforth if we pass this is before every application, when we start off, when you introduce it, you ask if there's anybody that's got, needs to disclose some outside contact. And Richard says, yeah, I talked to Billy Bob and Bubba, and they wanted to know about such and such. Yeah, that's all it is. And same with Jay. And I mean, it's not like he's going to
and I don't have
take
a problem with that. I don't want to have to tell somebody, hey, wait a minute, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you about this
No,
today.
it's not intended for you, like, in that way. But you certainly can disclose to us that you've had a conversation with somebody about that project.
By all means.
Okay.
All right, I've got a motion, a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay.
Abstain.
All right.
Just because it doesn't.
Sure. I have one abstention and the rest ayes. All right, next item on the agenda, election of officers. We are electing the president. When is the new term take place, Wayne? Next month? Starts in December, not January. It always throws me off. All right, anybody have any nominations for president or vice president?
Chairman and vice.
Chairman and vice chairman, excuse me.
And secretary as well.
And secretary.
Is that you?
Can I nominate Emily for secretary?
We can do it all as one, or we can do it individually.
Either
I
way.
can hold on.
We can take that.
We have a nomination for Emily as secretary.
What's that?
We have a nomination for Emily as secretary.
Yes.
Any nominations for vice president?
I nominate Rebecca Bryant for vice president.
Okay. Rebecca Bryant nominated for vice president. Any other nominations for vice president?
Vice chairman.
Vice chairman, excuse me. Sorry. I'll get there. In that case, that's our only nomination for vice chair. Any nominations for chairman?
I nominate Lee Turner.
Okay, Lee Turner nominated for chair. Any other nominations for chairman?
Move nominations be closed.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further? All right, all in favor to close nominations, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right. Does somebody want to make a motion to approve the nominations?
Move to approve the nominations.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right. Last item on the agenda, is this you, Emily, for the agenda, schedule, and deadlines?
Everybody has a copy of the deadlines, meeting dates, and schedules. I did move any that were conflicting with a holiday to a Thursday as opposed to the following Tuesday to try to help with absences. Does anybody have any conflicts that you see?
It's good.
Great job, Emily.
Do we need to approve that, or?
We have a meeting, okay, oh, never mind, I thought it was July
We need to
4th. I
approve
was,
this schedule?
Yes.
it's like, no, no.
Okay, Ralph makes a motion to approve the schedule. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Wayne, any further business?
Just wanted to mention that in your packet, we included the City of Fairhope moratorium report on that. Just generally, kind of one of the things that, as we went along, we found out that, of course, with growth, it's not just planning related, it's related to utilities and public works and drainage and the whole 9 yards. And so what we have been doing and what we want to continue to do is take a comprehensive approach to reviewing development to make sure that all of the appropriate resources are available and infrastructure is available, and also bringing in some new concepts for growth, new ways to address issues. And so that's kind of, if you read the report, that's one of the main emphasis in there is that more coordination amongst departments. And I feel like that's something we've been doing and will continue to do. We work well together. And so just want to make sure you guys are aware of that and have read it.
How's our agenda looking for next month?
Emily? Not terrible.
Well, we have several amendment changes to LID.
Yeah. 8 items, and some of those we have some other amendments we're bringing forward to y'all.
Great.
So,
I think it's like 11.
yeah, so it shouldn't be terrible.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
No, before we do that, I want to, about 2 meetings ago, I mentioned something about the standards that we use in utilities, and I just wanted to try to be able to make revisions to those standards, even though they're shown as being adopted or approved by the planning commission. And then I've not really gotten any direction. I took a sample of a way to allow us to use different specified materials or pumps or electrical equipment on a trial basis if it didn't meet our specifications, because I don't want to run off and start doing things without everybody understanding what we're trying to accomplish and the purpose for those things. And so in looking at the standards, you'll find that they're divided into several sections. One is design considerations, and then the other part of them are the construction specifications. And so to me, what I'm thinking the Planning Commission is all about is trying to make sure that the infrastructure is put in place in a way that meets the goals of the city. And in water and wastewater, you may look at, fire protection volumes as being a standard that we want to commit to. You may look at a gravity sewer system as a standard we want to commit to. And when you look at the design considerations in Division 2 of the standards, you'll find that there's a lot of application requirements for technical data relating to the design of the systems that are installed in these subdivisions. And that's fine and that's good, and that's kind of what the planning commission, in my mind now, and I'm making this up just from trying to read through some information and interpret what I think the intent of all that stuff is. So if the planning commission accepts the design criteria as the level of service that we want to provide these people who will be these future property owners in these subdivisions, and then as we start to move toward looking at the capacity issues that we're looking at, some of the rehabilitation work that we're starting to do, there's new materials, there's new products, and we want to be able to implement some of those things without having to worry about whether or not we need to get approval from anybody to start to look at a different type of a cured-in-place pipelining material or a way to rehab a manhole without having to think that it's not in our standards. So what I've tried to draft is, and Ken, with Ken's help, obviously, is a resolution that kind of separates those two functions from the planning commission purview. And I wouldn't ever want to start to allow things to be installed that weren't part of what the design criteria dictates or part of what our specifications require. But as we start moving forward, things are happening pretty fast in terms of what we need to be doing to not only to catch up, but to keep up with the progress of what I think the development will dictate that we do in the next maybe 3 to 4 years. So I'd like to put this on the table in terms of allowing us to monitor what the design criteria is here, but allow we as technical staff in the utilities to make sure the materials and the equipment that we use meet that design criteria as we go forward.
If I can note just real quickly, and what Richard's referring to is standards that are referenced in our subregs. They're already there, and we're referencing these standards, and so it's not a new proposal. It's already existing in our subregs.
Do we have to advertise this?
It'll be a change to the subdivision regulations.
Yes, because it's referenced in our subregs. I believe it would come under the purview of having to be advertised.
Are we going to get one of these from drainage too?
I'm sorry?
The drainage requirements are in the ordinance now. I mean, those are in the subregs. I mean,
Yeah, the standards I'm referencing right now are strictly water and wastewater.
Right.
There's no other, that is the standard that I'm talking about.
Richard, you've given us this tonight to review?
Yes,
For next month?
hopefully.
Okay.
Or do we need to make a motion to advertise it? So can you advertise this for next month?
Let's place
and
on
then
the agenda.
We'll have the public hearing next month, and then we can vote to approve it after.
And I don't know, Jay, the council, I mean, I
wouldn't have to
didn't
go
hear
to coun-
anybody speak up at the council meeting saying anything different. I know Kevin and I have talked about the need to start
Since it's-
implementing different materials in certain, applications, but as far as the criteria go, I think that's where, I think it rests with the planning commission in terms of what the standards should be set for in terms of level of service and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it wouldn't go to the council. You'd want them to be aware of it. But
Yes.
Since it's subdivision regs, it would just be voted on here.
Yes.
All right, well, that'll be on the next month. I can actually beat that. All right, we'll have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.